Right. Welcome to CurveBall DFI-ed. On our fifth podcast, we have the pleasure of having David Mishal. He's a successful portfolio analyst and CEO of Plan Daddy Plays. David works full-time at one of the largest private equity firms in the country and runs the company on the side. In today's podcast, we will learn how he successfully manages his time and how he is able to juggle both roles. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to get into is we did a little bit digging into your background to get ready for this thing. We saw that you kind of started out in New York City and went to Boston. I want to kind of know a little bit about how growing up in New York City, how that affected your shift to another major city.
I think for me, I didn't even really consider colleges that weren't in the city, and I think in hindsight that probably would have been a better decision for me to have kind of spread my wings in a different environment. But I was definitely very comfortable being a city kid. Really enjoyed like all the diverse things the city had to offer, and I didn't see any reason to change that for my college experience. So that's that my experience here in New York definitely led me to Boston for college. But I think more generally, I think growing up in an environment where you're surrounded by some of the most powerful and influential people, and you kind of see all the money that's being thrown around everywhere all the time in your face, but you also see the complete opposite side of that, and you see homeless people on the street, and you see those who are less fortunate than you in your classroom even. I definitely got to see the best of both worlds, and kind of like always had this bit of an internal conflict of like, having a prosperous career, but also like doing good. Being in New York definitely shaped kind of where I am right now.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Brooklyn Tech, one of the most diverse schools that we have in New York City. It's the largest high school in all of America. You have to take a test to get in there. So I definitely know a little bit about the diversity of what you're talking about coming from New York City.
I almost went to Brooklyn Tech myself, actually.
Yeah, I mean, and it's one of those places where it's like you really get to, I feel like after Brooklyn Tech, you don't necessarily feel diversity the same way ever again, because you're never going to be in a place where you're surrounded with that many different types of people in the same environment. And I think that that's one thing that's so great about New York City is because you get to work with so many different types of people. I wanted to also, and you said that you like giving back, and we saw that you were in AEPI, and part of the things about being in a fraternity is that you give back. So can you talk a little bit about how that whole giving back to the community, how that has affected you, and how that has ultimately shaped your views?
I think it's an interesting concept psychologically, in how the feeling of giving back is incredibly powerful and motivating. And I think the experience that I've had has been a little bit less direct, but at least, in school, there were some, mostly like Jewish events and other types of activities that like we as a fraternity would go to and help organize and set up and give back. But like even post grad, like there have been some really unique organizations in the city, one of which I don't know if I'm allowed to like give a plug or anything like that, but it's called Knock Knock Give a Sock, and like the concept is like very, very simple, very basic, like socks for the homeless. And it seems like something that's like so small and like inconsequential, but like the organization itself does a really great job of like getting people within the community to care and to like show that they care by attending like Shabbat dinners like with homeless people, or like people who are living in shelters, or like anything like that, and like giving my time to those causes. It always feels really nice afterwards, and I definitely wish that I did it more often. It's one of those things that like you kind of look back and you're like, wow, it's been a minute since I've done that. But like it's definitely something that I aspire to do a lot more often.
Yeah, you touched on the part about how you're part of a Jewish organization and how you gave up. In the Jewish culture, when you're growing up, your parents always want you to be a doctor, lawyer, finance, possibly an engineer, and ultimately you ended up in the finance field. How did your parents react when you were like, okay, so like not only am I in the finance industry, I also want to become an entrepreneur and start my own thing?
Yeah, so like I think my parents have always been pretty supportive of me because I happened to want to do the things that they wanted me to do. Um, so I think it definitely came as like a little bit of a shock when I told them about this opportunity and this kind of venture that I wanted to embark on. And I give a lot of credit to my co-founder Zoe, who really kind of like pushed me to take the risk because it was something that I was passionate about. But I think the way that they looked at it was like, look, you put in the time and the effort to do the thing that like we wanted you to do, and if that's not for you, then you gave it your best shot, and like you have the skill set and the experience now to broaden your horizons and take some risks, and like you have your work experience and your background to fall back on if things don't work out. So I think because it came about in a pretty practical way, my parents were pretty supportive. I also have parents who are quite different. My dad is incredibly risk averse and like very traditional in terms of like the career mindset. My mom comes from a family of entrepreneurs, and she's an entrepreneur herself. And she's had a few different businesses that have failed, and she's had really one that succeeded, and it's the one that she's still working in now. Um, so I think, yeah, I definitely got some mixed reactions, but ultimately they're incredible people and they're very supportive and just want, they just want me to be happy.
I think that's the best thing when you have people around you that do support you. I know when I started Do First Innovation, my family at first was kind of like, you're doing engineering right now in school, that should be 100% your focus. And then I kind of explained to them like, hey, like I can manage both at the same time. And now that it's like, it's extremely hard to do both at the same time. Um, but we were able to close our first deal this past Friday. And like when I told
Congrats.
my parents, and they were like, "Wow, like good job, like that's really amazing that you were able to close that deal." So kind of when that came to fruition, they were all kind of saw like, okay, so this is like actually possible for him. We're not like he doesn't just have to be an engineer; he could actually do this because it's kind of like that proven concept. Kind of talking more about like the juggling between like for me, it's like extremely difficult to manage school and my Do First Innovation. I can't imagine what it's like having two full-time jobs. So can you talk a little bit about how you manage both and kind of like how you give priority to one as opposed to the other?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm happy to answer that, and I'll also let Zoe jump in because she's also working a full-time job and working on this on the side. But I think for me, you know, it really comes down to priorities, and like my job is my priority. It is my number one. It's the income that allows me to embark on this journey in the first place. So it's always going to come first. Now, that being said, there have been times where we've had to like go do an event. Um, I'll give you the exact event. It's called Vegan Dale in New York City. We did it over the summer, over this past summer of 2021, and the amount of time and preparation it takes to gather all the materials and the equipment and set up the tent and all these things. Like it was a Saturday event, and we had to do a bunch of setup on Friday. So the event at that point in time um, was my priority, and I just communicated to my team that I was going to be busy for the latter half of Friday, and like just made sure to stay posted on on my phone, make sure nothing urgent was coming in and out. Um, but yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the reason why it's worked so well is just because I know what my priority is, and I just have to utilize my time efficiently during the hours when I'm not working my day job, and that means it's super late at night or it's on the weekends, then that's, how it needs to be. But Zoe, I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, hi there. I think, it can definitely be an adjustment at first. But I kind of have the mindset of my current job comes first, unfortunately, for better or for worse. When you are an employee at a company, just as I would want any employee at Plant Daddy to act, you sign a contract and you have, sort of an obligation to do what you need to do. And currently I'm actually at a hospitality company, and hopefully, if I am an incredible employee, I could possibly, make connections that can help me with Plant Daddy, and work together with people. And, as long as you have a good reputation, there's no reason why someone from my company couldn't be a business partner in the future or something like that. So I think it's, definitely keeping integrity, and, job comes first until Plant Daddy is big enough where, we can say goodbye to our current roles.
I think you touched upon there something that was very interesting about how you said you were able to merge the connection potentially with your business and your work. So like personally for First Innovation, we have like a senior design project at Stevens, and I was able to actually get one of the startups that we're working closely with. I spoke to one of my professors, and I'm actually going to be working on it for my senior design project, which is kind of cool. So I'm also kind of like building those connections and bridging the two together. So I think that's really interesting that you touched upon that. I wanted to get a little bit more into Plant Daddy Plays and kind of how like the idea came about. Yeah.
Yeah. Where to begin? So I think the story really begins when Zoe and I met. I had been vegan at that point. So we met about 2 years ago. I'd been vegan at that point for about 3 years, and Zoe was not. And I think through cooking for her and making all of these different, vegan alternative dishes to like the traditional versions of such. Actually, a lot of it was some like comfort foods that my family grew up eating, like breakfast and bolognese and like all these different dishes, whatever. I just did it with like a vegan twist, and like she really liked it. And so that was kind of like the first confidence booster where I was kind of just like, oh, interesting. Like I can actually have an impact on someone else's decision or choice, of what they decide to eat and like what they enjoy. And we actually ended up entering into a pizza making contest, and it was for a large hospitality company, and they were doing like an internal / external pizza making competition. And we entered like 2 vegan pizzas, 2 different types. One was like a breakfast pizza, and one was like a French type of, topping, whatever, like unique pizza. And we ended up getting second place in the competition. And this was just like we were competing against other people who were like chefs and like were in the hospitality industry. And like we were kind of just like messing around. Like we were just having a good time, having fun. Like it was not like something that we were taking like super seriously. But people really loved it, and we got second place. So like that was kind of like the second confidence booster that was like, okay, there's something here. Like I think that I can make things that people enjoy. And we started like a little Instagram, and like we started, I started like cooking for my friends a little bit more. My roommates who were around, I'd have them try dishes like in a more intentional way. And one day Zoe came to me with the idea and was basically like, hey, I'm looking at the Instagram right now, like it looks really good. Like we should turn this into a business. Like, why can't this just like, I think she said something along the lines of just like, it always takes you like so long, it takes you too long to like cook these things. I wish they were ready in like 5 minutes, like whatever. And like the idea kind of just like came about that it was like, oh, why don't we make something that's like frozen that people can just pop in the oven, and it's easy, healthy, and brings back the same type of emotional connection to like the comfort foods that we all love and enjoy eating.
I think it's pretty cool about how you said that like you were vegan, you saw the problem. Oh, you didn't see there was enough alternatives, so you went out there and you kind of did it yourself. And I think that it's kind of one of those things where it's like you're in the right place at the right time. New York City, huge place, and definitely the right place for something like to be a vegan, where it's a lot easier. I can't imagine if you're from like a small town in like Idaho. I feel like being a vegan is not necessarily something that would be viable to the people that are from there. And you kind of touched upon about how you initially started with the recipes. I wanted to know, do you still develop the recipes, or is there kind of like a team now, or what has changed since the initial 2 years ago when you started doing this thing?
Yeah, a lot has changed. So I just want to give a little bit more color on one of the things that you just mentioned. So, there are plenty of vegan alternatives out there, and there are a number of kind of like vegan frozen food brands. And we knew that going in. So there's another kind of aspect to our dishes. They're all low FODMAP. And, for those of you who aren't familiar with what that is, FODMAPs are, they're like 5 food groups, etc. They're like 5 different types of essentially carbohydrates that many people find it difficult to digest. And I had been on a low FODMAP diet for like a while at that point, on and off, because it's very hard to maintain. There's a FODMAP ingredient in pretty much anything. Think of mushrooms, garlic, onions, all these different types of like common foods that are in any sort of sauce, or it's really just like ingredients in pretty much everything we eat. And so we kind of came about it from an additional angle that was not only vegan, it's also low FODMAP. So that's just like kind of a little bit more background on the brand. In terms of creating the recipes, we created the first recipe ourselves. That was like the initial goal, and the intention was to bring our unique recipe to the market. And after an insane amount of iterations, we finally brought the product to market, and we found a manufacturer who was willing to do a small order for us. At the end of that whole process, we kind of realized like how much time was sucked up from creating a recipe from scratch. So we decided to look for a co-packer who had experience in the vegan food space. And we basically approached a few different people, and the one that we went with ultimately, and said, hey, look, we really love the food that you guys are able to make, but we have like a little bit of a different spin. We're going for a low FODMAP food. Can we alter your recipe and brand it ourselves? And so we worked with a co-packer to do exactly that. And now we have 5 products on the market.
Yeah. I mean, when you entered the food business, it's kind of one thing where you're starting with fresh. How did you understand and get to that point where it's like, okay, so like this is how it's supposed to look like when it's fresh. How now that I want to develop it in the frozen food aisle, where you need all these permits and you need to have like this market testing, and you need to have like that frozen food space, which is super valuable in supermarkets. How are you able to, with your background or your network, kind of like break into those shelves and have like that product placement?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I'll say that to start. It's incredibly difficult, and I wouldn't even say that we haven't had the success that we've wanted to have at this point, but we've definitely had some success. And I'd say that one, for us, it came down to branding. Our packaging is incredibly unique and very different from everything else you see on the frozen shelves. It stands out like a sore thumb. Like you can see it glowing from a mile away. And like that was the exact intention behind it. We were like, we need to create something that stands out and that draws people's attention. Whether they buy it or not is irrelevant. If they walk to the aisle and they pick it up and they look at it and put it back, like that's a win in our book. So I think that's super important for sure. But I think for us, it actually came down to thinking about more of a unique strategy. We're fortunate enough to kind of operate our company in a market that does have a lot of independent grocers. I know if you go throughout the country, there are a lot of areas in this country where you kind of can only go to like your big box retailer type of situation. You know, like New York has hundreds and if not thousands of independently owned like bodegas and grocery stores and whatever. So it gave us the opportunity to kind of go in like one by one and just like sell and just try and get into these small little shops, gain some traction, and then prove ourselves and then enter some of the larger retailers.
And I think also to answer your question about like how did we with no experience know like what is it going to look like after, like what is this product going to be? And I think a lot of it was working backwards. So like from our initial pink mac and cheese, which is our first product, we were in, my West Village studio, literally making batches of cheese until it came out looking and feeling exactly perfect and freezing it overnight and then taking it out of the freezer and looking at the consistency when it was heated up. So it was a lot of trial and error, especially for the first order. We had no idea what we were doing. So it was really just like, we turned my apartment into like a science lab, which was kind of cool.
I think that's like the coolest thing about starting a business, like the whole trial and error phase. And I also think that it's really, really cool how you guys started with like this whole pink and splash, because it's like nobody's doing this. And I think that right when you start something, you do need to kind of stand out from the competition, because if you look just like every other mac and cheese that's in the frozen section, nobody's going to pick you up when they already had the competitor mac and cheese and they've been enjoying it. But if they see like this new pink mac and cheese, they're like, oh, what is this? Like, oh, I definitely need to try this. I think that's really cool about how you guys came up with that idea. And I want to know a little bit more about like what made you guys be like, okay, so like we're gonna make this pink. Like, what made you guys come up with that? Because I feel like that's not like the normal idea. Like, let's make pink mac and cheese.
Yeah, for sure. It kind of just came to us one day. I can't explain it like too deeply, but like it really kind of just had to do with the brand. We just thought that like we were designing our packaging, we had finalized our logo, we kind of had like our Instagram and like initial marketing strategy in place. And like this was all happening simultaneously. Like as we were creating the recipes, as we were in Zoe's kitchen and just experimenting, like that was at the same time that we were working on the logo and the packaging. So like as things kind of just progressed and developed, we were like, this would be an interesting first product for our brand specifically, and we stuck with it.
I think you touched upon about the importance and kind of how having Zoe by your side has been like super helpful for you. I know when I started to do First Innovation, I kind of did this I did it by myself for like the first 2-3 months, and I was like, okay, like I'm really gonna burn out and fail if I don't bring people on. So I'm very fortunate to have a great team of Levy and Lucas helping me run the show here. But I wanted to know a little bit about what you think makes a good partner in whatever venture you're in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's I think compromise is huge, and kind of just like being able to talk openly and freely without being nervous of certain like consequences to the things that you say is very helpful to maintain like an open dialogue and like honest communication. But I think more than like, I think aside from that, like that's more on the communication front. I would say it's just different skill sets. Like I know my strengths and I know my weaknesses, and Zoe perfectly fills my weaknesses. So it just like happened to work out, and like we're very fortunate. And I think I probably wouldn't have been as inclined to embark on this journey if I hadn't known some of Zoe's strengths that she was going to bring to the table to kind of compensate for the things that I lacked. I don't know if there's anything to add.
Yeah, no. I mean, yeah, you said it.
I mean, yeah, you kind of spoke about your strengths and weaknesses. So I kind of wanted to know a little bit about the challenges that you experienced in the private equity world and how those experiences have been able to help you in the food world.
Yeah, so like I'd say for me, I'm pretty much a generalist, and when deals come across my desk, there's a certain turnaround time to try to understand the business and decide whether or not it's something that I want to have a larger conversation about with the higher ups. And there's so many times where something will come across and I'm just like, I know nothing about this business. And I'll need to just Google stuff, like all this stuff, or just like look back at some old research or like talk to someone who's done a similar deal in the past. Like I kind of just like need to figure it out. And I think that's what translates pretty well to Plant Daddy is like I had no idea what I was doing. I had no insight into how the food business worked, how the grocery industry worked, how frozen food worked. Like I didn't know anything. And so like I think just that ability to accept that you don't know something, but still work to figure it out is pretty much the biggest takeaway that I've gotten from my day job.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important to find those skills that you're able to transcend from one area to the other. And I wanted to know a little bit more about like your whole background being in finance, whether it be rising up the ranks from one company to another. I wanted to know what was the hardest transition for you? Like once you were like, okay, I'm going into the food business. What was like the hardest thing for you to be like, wow, how do people even make it in this industry with like this as like one of the benchmarks?
The hardest thing for us was order quantities. We're bootstrapping this business and we don't have a ton of marketing dollars behind us, and we don't have like this big push to like launch in many states with a ton of product. Like a lot of these manufacturing facilities and co-packers require pretty high minimum orders, and it was really, really difficult. And we actually got super lucky to be able to work with the people that we're working with in the quantities that we're able to. And I don't think that we would be here if it weren't for that. I'd say that that's probably the biggest obstacle when, bootstrapping this business, was finding someone who'd be willing to work with us on such small order quantities to begin with.
I think that another thing that has been able to affect it is the fact that you're in the East Coast. I think that if you were mentioned before in Idaho, I don't know if any bodegas or supermarkets would necessarily be interested in having some sort of like new product like this, because I don't know necessarily if there's that large of a vegan community in those parts of America. Can you talk a little bit more about how living on the East Coast has been able to kind of like jumpstart or kind of help you with your business?
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting question because another obstacle that we faced was our direct to consumer model. Essentially is like we would love to be able to ship things across the country to my sister in LA. But the reality is that shipping is expensive, especially if you're talking about a large package with dry ice and frozen products. And I think when we were first starting and we were looking for warehouses and fulfillment centers to store our product, we did have to ask ourselves whether or not we wanted to put up enough capital at the beginning to have enough product to store in a facility in the Midwest so that we could reach those customers on the West Coast? Or do we start smaller and stick to the East Coast? And I think it definitely benefited us to choose to stick with the East Coast. And the reason we decided to do that was because there is such a large market here. I don't think that the market is, I mean, look, it's growing everywhere, but I think the reach that we have to people on the East Coast it's incredible. And we're really fortunate to be here. And we have all of our manufacturing, all of our fulfillment and warehousing and everything, it's all in Brooklyn. And we lucked out because it happened to be a place where people wanted the product that we had to offer.
And I think also, like, more specifically into New York itself, we would not have been able to do this in another city where you need a car, where there's no public transportation, where, you know, every other block is another big grocery store. You know, it would not have been able to happen. Even in a place like, you know, LA or Miami, I mean, you need a car, you need a truck, and this is frozen food. So if we can't, you know, I mean, we're literally taking shopping bags onto the train and taking these samples across town to grocery stores. So I think even more specifically than the East Coast, if it weren't for New York City and everything and the density of it, you know, it would have been really, really difficult to do.
A lot about how you went from grocery store to grocery store. Can you talk a little bit more about like the importance of networking and how that has been able to help you along with your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would actually say that surprisingly, it's a little bit mixed. Surprisingly, networking hasn't really done much because it is so fragmented here. Yes, people know people, but you know, everyone is kind of independent, at least the people that we've worked with. So I wouldn't say that it's helped a huge amount from a sales standpoint. Where it has helped is from an operating standpoint. And, you know, when we talk to distributors, we talk to warehousing facilities and fulfillment centers, we're honest with them and we tell them about our business, we tell them about our quantities, we tell them about our sales. And sometimes they're going to say, you're not big enough, but here's so-and-so that you should reach out to. I think they'd be a good fit. And maintaining those relationships over time allow you to go back and say, hey, we actually did reach out to that person you told us to. We have been working with them for 6 months and we have gotten bigger and now we'd like to work with you. So like, it kind of does, yeah, you know, pros and cons to some of the grocery industry networking for sure.
Kind of spoke about how you asked one fulfillment center and they kind of told you about another one that may be able to help you. We saw on your website that you guys do promote other vegan restaurants, and specifically you guys have a blog where you guys talk about the best vegan restaurants across the city. Can you talk a little bit more about how your brand is not just about you guys serving your products, but also to like bring awareness about vegan food and how more about like the message that you guys are trying to spread with Plain Daddy Plates?
For sure. I mean, I'd like to say that like I don't think that it's incredibly specific to our company. I think that the vegan plant-based world is a very collaborative and uplifting segment of the food industry, because I mean, yes, we're all in it for slightly different reasons, but you know, two, if not all of the reasons for being in it ultimately has to do with like our perception of like the greater good of society. So like in terms of veganism, I think that there are like three main pillars, right? There's like the health benefits, the environmental benefits, and the animal welfare benefits. The health benefits arguably could be considered individualistic, but the other two are for everyone. And so I think from that standpoint, like at the core of like what veganism is, it's about creating a better place for everybody. So to go against that by having a mindset that's incredibly competitive rather than collaborative, I think just stands against the values of veganism almost. And that's kind of like, I don't know, that for some reason that's the best way that my mind can put it, but like I think that it just naturally aligns with, you know, who we are as people and what we're trying to do.
Pretty interesting. There are a lot of competitors now in New York City because there are a lot of people that are in this community, and definitely with more vegan restaurants popping up, let's say every year, and them like hitting with some of the top restaurants in the city actually, which I think is quite interesting about how there's like a major shift. What do you think makes Plant Daddy Place different than the competition, other than the vibrant pops of pink and like the interesting marketing that you guys have?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think within the grocery space, there are still only a few players, and I don't believe that there's any one that has come out on top yet as like the household brand. Until that happens, I think there's going to be a lot of innovation and a lot of new entrants into the market. And, you know, we hope to stick around and, you know, provide enough value to customers that they choose us. But I also think that part of the reason why we're going for this low FODMAP component is for exactly that reason. We know that plant-based and vegan items are beginning to become saturated as a market. And I think the low FODMAP component provides us with a niche customer base that will stick with us as more and more products come to market.
Yeah, and I think also something that does separate us is, you know, a lot of our competitors are trying to make veganism about being on a diet, about losing weight, about, you know, a lot of things that don't necessarily, you know, come with being vegan for everyone, or, you know, that's not why I'm vegan. I'm not vegan because I want, you know, to be slimmer or something like that. So I think Plant Daddy kind of embraces that. And we say, you know, we're not trying to change your body. We're giving you the comfort foods that you love, that fill your cravings. It's just better for your overall health. It's better for your blood. It's better for your joints and your muscles. You know, we're not trying to kind of create this, you know, veganism equals being, you know, health conscious and diet friendly. We're not. You know, we want you to have your comfort foods, and that's sort of something that separates us
as well, and kind of why it started too, because those are the foods that David loved growing up.
Yeah, we literally started this because I just couldn't stop eating comfort food. I couldn't eat 3 salads a day. It wasn't working for me.
I mean, I definitely understand exactly what you're talking about. When I was running a marathon, I was basically not eating enough calories, and I was just basically pumping down like these protein shakes. And I was like, I definitely need to think of a different way what I could do to figure this thing out. So I definitely changed to like a vegan-based protein powder because it's way less irritable to your stomach. It definitely does not have the same taste, but the effects that it does have on your body, it makes it a lot easier to consume in large quantities. So I definitely could kind of relate a little bit to that side. I wanted to know a little bit more about how I thought it was really interesting about how you said this whole thing about how you think that the market is like there is competition, but you don't think that there's a clear victor, and you kind of attacked it. And I think that that's kind of like the same exact thing where it's like there are a lot of people competing for a job in the finance industry, but that doesn't stop you from going into it. So I want to understand a little bit more about how there obviously isn't a clear correlation between vegan food and private equity. So what made you think that you could succeed on both fronts?
Okay. So I definitely didn't. I definitely did not think that I could succeed on either front. And I'll give you a little bit more background about that as well, like in general. So when I graduated from school, obviously everyone wants to get their IB offer first. I mean, obviously you want to get your internship, right? But then you want to get your offer from that. And if you don't, you want to get your IB offer, all that. I didn't come from a family who really knew much about finance, who really knew much about that kind of world. And while everyone else was preparing for all of this stuff, like I was just late to the game. Like I just didn't know what I was doing. And with just like, I graduated with like an offer from a large bank in Boston in like the risk department. And I was just like not happy about it. So I accepted the offer and I kept looking for jobs. And also the job was in Boston. So like I also wanted to be back in New York. Point is, I kept looking for jobs and it was really difficult. And I didn't think that I would ultimately end up where I am today, but I ended up coming in the back door and I did find a job in New York in like a corporate finance advisory role that I started in, right out of school. And then I used that and pivoted into a kind of like financial advisory type role, and then used that opportunity to transition over to the firm that I'm at now. And while being at the firm I'm at now, I actually transitioned into my current role. So I was in more of like a middle office, back office type role for a few years, and use that experience and that opportunity to the best of my abilities to kind of transition more into a front office role, and ultimately ended up doing it. But I will say for the longest period of time, probably the entire time that I wasn't in my current role, I didn't think that I'd ever make it to this role. I mean, there are so many interviews that I went through, so many case studies I did, so many final round, like super days that I like, all these things, and just like, no, 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 no. Like I didn't have an investment banking background, so I wasn't always considered. So I just didn't think that I would actually end up being where I am today, and I'm very grateful that I am. So that's kind of like the private equity side of things. The business side of the Plant Daddy side of things, I'm a very risk averse person. I never thought of myself as someone who would be an entrepreneur or a business owner. I just didn't think it was in my blood. But Zoe really brought it out of me, and she kind of gave me that confidence, and she gave me that strength to feel comfortable taking a risk that I never would have taken if it weren't for her. So I credit Z for that. So I think to answer your question more succinctly, I didn't think that I'd succeed in either, and I'm very grateful that so far I have.
I think you pointed out two things that I thought were really important, and even in my own journey. So currently, right now, I am obviously trying to break into venture capital, and I was trying to build my own like backbone, where it's like build this whole financial background, and I was rejected by every single major bank in New York City, Albany, California, where I applied everywhere. They all said no to me. So that's ultimately when I went back to the VCs, and I'm like, I need something, and they kind of pushed me to do like a kind of similar thing to this, and then I was like, wait, why don't I just turn this into a company? I think that my family being immigrants, where it's like you see an opportunity, you got to jump on it. So I think that kind of hustle runs in my blood, and I saw that there was this opportunity for me to start something. And definitely, if you want to work in venture capital, it's a lot more beneficial if you do have something underneath your belt where you started something so that you understand how things work. And I think that another thing that you pointed up on, how it was extremely important for you to have Zoe by your side. I think that when you do have somebody in your corner, business partner, whatever in life, that's able to push you and kind of like be the cheerleader, it's a lot easier. And it's kind of like they're with you for the ups and they're with you for the downs. I wanted to also like touch upon about how, like, obviously, I think that it's pretty clear that it's like you're in the right track. So I wanted to know, when did you first realize that you were going in the right direction?
It's a tough one. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I mean, look, I still don't know. I really don't. I think that I felt an incredible sense of accomplishment when I was actually able to hold in my hands the physical products that we were selling to people through Plant Daddy. And I think in that moment, when I actually held it in my hands and the packaging was beautiful and I took it out and I put it in the microwave and I ate it, I was like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, that was when I was like, all right, this was a good decision. That being said, like, I don't know that it's the right path. I think what we've started to see more recently is the changing landscape of the grocery industry, especially in New York City. You've got companies like Getter and Gorillas and Fridge No More who are completely disrupting local grocery chains. And you've got Whole Foods and you've got Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's doesn't, Trader Joe's is a company that has such a strong foothold in New York City. And there's 0% chance that we ever get in there because obviously everything that they do is branded by themselves. So like our whole strategy of branding is it's irrelevant, right? So I think all of that's to say is that we don't know if we're on the right path, but we're determined to continue to change and adapt, to position ourselves as best we can, and hopefully one day feel like we are on the right path. But who knows? I'm not sure if that day will come, and maybe that's a good thing. Also, like I think, if you're too comfortable and like like you're on the right path, then you're probably in a place where you could easily be disrupted by other companies or technology or whatever it may be. So yeah.
I think it's really cool how you mentioned how you always have to be on top of things and never fall back, because somebody will come and be like, okay, this is my competition, not anymore, like, and just completely disrupt the whole industry. And you also mentioned a couple things about how, like throughout this whole conversation, about how you were like, oh, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur, and you never thought you could make it in the industry that you're making it in now. So now that you have all this advice that you could give yourself in the past, what would you tell yourself?
I think I would tell myself that as long as the goal is clear in my head, and as long as I put in the time and the effort, not to worry about the little things or worry about external factors. And I think what I mean by that is, I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier with like coming out of school and like seeing the path that everyone else was on and kind of having to go through the back door to get where I am today. Like throughout that time, I was definitely stressed and I was definitely anxious about where my life was going. And the advice that I would give to that person would be to try and enjoy the place that you're in, because if you really want something, you can get it.
That's pretty good advice. I'm not over that hump yet, and I'm still going out there chasing my dreams. So hopefully one day, I think that it's really important to never give up on your dreams until you have no other option but to give up. So I think that's very interesting that you kind of spoke a little bit about that. The final question that I have for you, we'd like to know, like obviously in the business world and in the finance world, nothing is ever perfect. So I want to know a little bit about the challenges and how you kind of overcame them in your life.
Yeah. So I would say that I'm very fortunate, and I definitely recognize the privilege that I do have. But I think something that hit my family pretty hard and actually kind of was probably the catalyst for the professional path that I chose to take, was my family got not caught up, but we suffered from the criminal acts of Bernie Madoff. And that was like a real whirlwind for me specifically, because I was like my dad and I would talk about this stuff all the time. So like I really knew kind of like what was going on. And that was kind of like my first like intro to like how the world of finance works and why that the whole thing happened in the first place. And I would say like it was really stressful, and I was pretty young when it happened. I was, my first or second year of high school. And my entire college fund was wiped out. So it really kind of like forced me to work harder, to get better grades, to get a scholarship, to go to a school that I really wanted to go to. And it was definitely challenging to like adjust the lifestyle a little bit and like to adjust my mindset and like my work ethic. And I guess kind of coming through and getting the scholarship that I got to go to the school that I wanted to go to was definitely like a great feeling and sense of accomplishment after having, kind of suffered through kind of like a challenging moment in my life.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story, as well as all the other advice that you gave to the future entrepreneurs that are trying to make something of themselves right now. If you have like anything that you want to ask the audience or plug Plan Daddy Plates in any way, you could do that now. And thank you and Zoe again so much for coming onto the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having us. I think the one thing that I would like to say, that I would like to send out into the world to everybody, is to try and keep an open mind and try some new things. I know that vegans don't necessarily get the best reputation. I'm certainly not judging anybody. But with that, I definitely ask everyone to try something new, and see where it takes you.
Yeah. Thank you so much again.